It's Song Talk Radio.
Greetings all. It's great to have you back with us. This is the show for songwriting nerds, where we get into the nitty-gritty technical details of the songwriting process. And don't forget, you can always give us your 2 cents at the songwriting process at feedback@songtalk.ca. I am Phil Emery. Neil's off doing something, jamming, I think. So we are super lucky to have a longtime friend of the show. It was actually one of our first guests when we were back on the radio so long ago. Professional songwriter, one of the Song Studio Workshop Series founders, and host of the Hooks and Ladders podcast. Amongst so many other things, Blair Backham is back here with us. Great to have you with us, Blair.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Phil. Great to be here. Always great to be here.
Always great to have you. And our guest tonight is multi-award winner, singer-songwriter Desiree Dorion. Welcome to the show, Desiree.
Thank you so much for having me. It's nice to meet you both.
Great. All right. Before we get started, here are some bits of news. We are still accepting entries into our Songwriting Challenge 2023. And that challenge is to write a song in a mode that you are unfamiliar with. And you can get more information on the challenge at our site, songtalk.ca. And there's a link at the top of the page and more information about the challenge and some resources and all that stuff. And, of course, mode is so something other than major and minor. So, Dorian or Lydian or one of those. It's a little challenging at first, but it's a great experience. And I've actually wound up with something I never would have written otherwise. So it's kind of fun. Now, Blair, you're starting to do the Song Studio online. What is it and when does it start and other good stuff?
Well, Song Studio is our week-long workshop that Alistair Bradley and I have been doing for almost 20 years. This is year 19. And it's a week-long workshop. Used to do it only in July and only in person. But we decided because of the pandemic, we decided we'd do an online version. And then we decided when we went back to doing a live workshop, we'd continue doing the online version because we had a greater range. Well, first of all, we could have people from other countries join us without having to fly to Canada. And that, obviously it's a money saver for us if it's a mentor, and it's a money saver for the participant too. So we're doing an online workshop. We have, and you're the first to hear, we have a great lineup of mentors who will sit and hear, they'll listen to your songs and offer constructive criticism and ideas for where they may go. We've got Bob Wiseman joining us, the great Bob Wiseman, great singer-songwriter, also former member of Blue Rodeo. We have Jeremy Fisher, who is a fantastic singer-songwriter, but he's also gone into producing a kids' television show. And he's a great teacher as well. And he writes all the music for the kids' show and so forth. But he's had, records on the radio, and he's a great songwriter. We have Sandy Schofield, who is an Indigenous singer-songwriter from Vancouver. She's fantastic and beautiful voice. And Jane Siberry, Issa Siberry is how she's sometimes known, is joining us as a mentor as well. And then we have a music supervisor coming in and a music publisher. And, it's an information-packed week, October 23rd to 27th via Zoom. But you can find out all the details at songstudio.ca.
Awesome. Sounds like it's going to be an amazing experience, as it always is. I've known people who've actually done it, and they've had a blast. And
it can be quite intense, but I think it's really, it's a really valuable experience for a lot of people. Yeah, I'm sure there are some people who, you can't please everybody, but we certainly seem to please a lot of people. We have about a 50 to 60% return rate, which is kind of amazing. So people who have done the workshop before, and before we started doing the Zoom thing, we did have people coming from Singapore, from Vancouver. We have a woman who comes from England. She has come 11 years out of the 19 we've been doing it, and she and I made an album together because her songs have become so good. And I said, I'll produce an album for you anytime, just name it. So we made a record in Dublin, in Ireland, and she's fantastic. So we have people from all over the place who seem to really love it.
That is awesome. So songstudio.ca, right?
That's right.
All right. I want to pick your the folks here's brains about something that everyone's can't seem to stop talking about, and that is artificial intelligence. And people are using it. Some people say people have used it for creating music or writing lyrics. Desiree, I want to start off with you. Have you looked into this AI thing? Have you played around with it at all, or do you think it's a bad thing, good thing?
No, the only artificial intelligence I have is in my own brain. Yeah, no, and actually, I day job as a lawyer, so I question the legality of the ownership even of a song if you're using AI.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, wasn't there a ruling in the States that scripts created with AI couldn't be copywritten?
I don't know. I haven't looked into it. I don't do music law. I'm just thinking that the ownership would be an interesting question here in Canada.
Well,
yeah, I don't know.
Because there's that aspect to Canadian copyright law, the moral right of authorship, and that's considered, a sacrosanct part of the copyright law, particularly for music. And how do you apply that if it's written by artificial intelligence?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I also just think
sure.
like your pride, how could you, I mean, I'm a singer-songwriter, so I actually, perform the stuff that I write. And I can't imagine sitting up on stage saying, claiming to have authored something that I didn't actually author. It just, I don't know. My pride wouldn't allow me to do it.
There are a lot of people with no pride whatsoever when it comes to this stuff, and who say, I actually saw an argument. It was online, but it was not an argument, but a discussion where, no, wait a second. Hold on. Who was it? It was Nick Cave who was asked, what about, the rise of AI? What, why would you use it? It makes things faster and easier. So why wouldn't you use it was what the questioner said. And Nick Cave's response was fantastic. And you can look it up. I won't quote it because I don't remember it word for word, but basically he said, we don't want things faster and easier. When it's art, you actually want to feel like somebody worked on it. You want to feel like their heart and soul went into it. Faster isn't the point. Turning out more songs that have no heart, why would we want to do that? And I really thought, and he was much more eloquent than I am, but it was a good response.
Yeah, it's interesting. I have played around with it a couple of times. I've my marketing practice, everyone's talking about AI. And I've looked at it for generating copy, and the copy is, at first, looks really good, but turns out to be really soulless and bland. And I don't think that's very good for a product because you need to connect with your potential customer. I've tried using it for photos, and what it does to humans is horrifying. So they kind of look right, but like their eyes are sort of in the wrong position.
Or they have an extra finger.
Yeah, it's really weird.
It's really weird. Yeah.
So I'm going, well, I don't know if quite yet it's going to be bad. One thing was kind of fun is you can get it to generate random words for you.
Yes.
And that's a great way of using it as, I think Brian Eno has a card deck. There's lots of different ways that you can get these ideas together to get yourself out of your brain. So it's just another way of, a random number generator. And it was kind of useful for that because it was a couple of combinations of words I wouldn't have come up with.
Right. I used a website called lyricstudio.net. And I paid a subscription for a year, lyricstudio.net. And it was, and the website makes suggestions for you for like the next line. You write the first line, it makes a suggestion for the second line, et cetera, and so forth. And then if you don't like that suggestion, you go to the next suggestion. And if you don't like that, et cetera. What I found was it was like having a bad co-writer who was relentless. So it's like working in a room with somebody who's not good, but they keep coming up with ideas, and eventually it would like get me going with an idea.
Trigger something in your own brain.
Yeah, and I would get rid of whatever they had suggested, and I'd type something else that I thought was better, and then it would respond with something that was demonstrably not better, and et cetera, I found it quite helpful, and I wrote about 3 or 4 songs that way. And then I didn't want to keep paying for it because I wasn't using it as much as I should or could, for the money I was spending.
Oh, yeah, there's lots of tools out there. It's, I guess, like anything else, it's how you use them. All right, now on to our guest. Our guest's awards, many awards, have included a 2014 Juno nomination, 6 appearances on Canada's top 100 countries charts, and a Songwriter of the Year award from the Manitoba Country Music Association. She has collaborated with many songwriters, including Doc Walker's Dave Wassilou, and an artist she has admired since childhood, Crystal Shawanda. Her music has captured the attention of some of the largest media outlets in Canada, landing her appearances on Breakfast Television Toronto, all across the CTV network and eTalk. And let's take a listen to her track now.
It's when you bring me coffee at 7 a.m. When you make the bed so I can lay down my head. It's when you roll your eyes at me after something I said. That's how I know. Oh, when you playing our favorite song and we dance in the living room. It's when you call me outside to look up at the moon. And it's the way you hold me when I'm feeling out of tune. That's how I know. Oh, that's how I know that you love me. You won't let me go when I've lost my way. You lead me home, you let me know that you want me. And I'm beautiful, you make it easy to love. Yeah, that's how I know, that's how I know. That's how I know. You make it easy to love. Yeah, that's how I know. When you run the bath after my hard day of work, bring me a glass of wine to soften the hurt. So I smell you on me after wearing your shirt. That's how I know. Oh, that's how I know that you love me. You won't let me go when I've lost my way. You lead me home, you let me know that you want me. And I'm beautiful, you make it easy to love. Yeah, that's how I know, that's how I know. That's how I know. You make it easy to love. Yeah, that's how I know. It ain't always sunshine, colors and rainbows, but you're there beside me, and that's how I know. It ain't always sunshine, colors and rainbows, but you hold my heart, and that's how I know. That's how I know that you love me. When I've lost my way, you lead me home, you let me know that you want me. And I'm beautiful, you make it easy to love. Yeah, that's how I know, that's how I know. That's how I know. You make it easy to love. Yeah, that's how I know. That's how I know. That's how I know. You make it easy to love. Yeah, that's how I know.
Awesome tune. Awesome tune. So what
Thank
is
you.
now? What is your process as a songwriter? Are you a music first, lyrics first person?
Usually lyrics. I can barely play the guitar, like barely. And when I released my very first album when I was 14 years old, and when I wrote that album, I couldn't play any instrument whatsoever. And so I would literally just write lyrics in my head and come up with a melody in my head, and then take that to a producer, sing the song a cappella, and get them to figure it out. So,
Wow.
I mean, as I've gotten older, I've started to mess around on the guitar a little bit, and I mean, I'm by no means I can play like the basic chords. And so if I'm writing a song solo, You could almost always tell because it's a very basic melody. Yeah. So it just kind of differs. And then sometimes, sometimes I'll be like I drive nonstop. I live in the country and I'm driving all the time. And I put on about 40, 50, I think this year I'm close to 60,000 kilometers a year. And, so I write a lot in my car, and, ideas will come to me in my car and I'll just write the lyrics down or get them in a voice note. And then whenever I get to my destination, I'll try and put the music to what I'm thinking and structure it up a bit more and make it make sense. But, it's just different every time for me.
Are you, this sounds like a very specific question, but in the car, do you have a radio on or is it just silence?
It depends, because I drive so much. So sometimes I don't want to hear noise. And sometimes I ride in silence, but other times I'll listen to, an audio book or something. And then other times I want to rock out and I want to sing at the top of my lungs and, put on a concert in the car, so to speak. So yeah, it just depends on my mood.
I write in the car too sometimes, and I find it's fantastic because you can get into this weird sort of Zen state as the miles go by. And I don't have the radio on, and then just something will come to me. And I don't know if you share this, but I find that if I can remember the song the next day, I'll make a voice note of it anyway, just in case. But if I can remember it, to me, that's a good sign. It means it's memorable, at least to me anyway. So, yeah. Writing in the car is pretty cool because really there's not much else to do. So you sort of focus on it.
There isn't.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I've written a lot of songs in the car.
Are you capturing like your ideas, like sort of general ideas? Do you have sort of like a hook book, I think as people call them, or?
Oh yeah. Yeah. If I hear a sentence, or if I hear, like for instance, on this last album, I wrote a song with Steve Mitchell called "Love You to Death," and I came to him with that title when we wrote it, and that's all I had. But I was watching the show Intervention, and which is a show about addiction, if you've seen it. And, these people were confronting their loved one who was struggling with an addiction. And one of the family members said, "I can't love you to death." And I thought that's kind of a cool way to put a boundary on somebody that, like, normally we say, "I love you to death," till death do us part or whatever. But it was kind of a really neat way to say to someone who's struggling with an addiction, "I cannot love you to death. I don't have it in me to do that." And we built the song around that one sentence. And then one day I was cutting the grass and I was thinking about, this is a different song altogether. I was thinking about, George Floyd, who had just, been killed in the States, and, how that really triggered the Black Lives Matter movement. And I was thinking about Trump, and I was thinking about how, metaphorically, he's like a gun. Like he's like an explosive device. And then I thought, I wonder what president he is. Like what's his number? And I looked him up, and it turned out that he was the 45th president of the United States. And so I thought, Colt 45. I could write a song that is metaphorically connected to Trump using Colt 45, using a gun as a metaphor. Don't mention him at all in the song, but that song is about him. The entire song is about him. And I co-wrote that with Steve Mitchell as well. And there's some cool ones that it's just, it doesn't, I don't know where, for me, I'm an overthinker. I've been told I'm an overthinker. And so when I drive, or if I'm on my lawnmower, or if I'm out for a run, I'm constantly looking around, and then I probably have a touch of ADHD. And so, my brain is constantly firing on all cylinders, and it's tough to shut off sometimes, but it's been a blessing and a curse.
It's funny. Elvis Costello says that it's a curse. It's a blessing and a curse, this songwriter thing, because you're having a conversation with somebody and you're thinking, oh, this person's really interesting. Wait, what did you say? Hold on. And then you have to pull out your notebook or whatever, or go excuse yourself and record it into your phone. But so it's a blessing and a curse, I would say. And I've talked to songwriters who have tried to retire from songwriting because they got bitter about the music business and they thought, I don't want to do that anymore. I'm not going to write any songs. And they couldn't stop. They still had a notebook, even though they knew they were never going to use it or probably never going to use it.
It's a good habit to actually develop, is to actually grab these ideas and put them into a notebook. And it's something I've never actually done. And I actually do.
Really?
I keep all my stuff. Yeah, like I think I counted up, I have 115 songs that I've written over my life. They're all in my head. And so if I ever fall down and hit my head, I'm screwed.
Oh my goodness.
Blair, that's why I've been saying I'm trying to record everything because...
Yeah, you're trying to get the catalog out of your head. That's great.
Yeah, but it's just, I never got into the habit of writing anything down on paper. And when I was playing guitar for other people, I found out if I wrote down the chords on a piece of paper, I couldn't remember them.
That's interesting.
But if we did it audible, it'd be like 2 times through and I knew the whole song. So it was so weird. And it's going like, so my brain just goes, it's written down. I'm not going to bother with it. So yeah, it's important to understand. Yeah, it's important to understand how you work, I guess. And
I think so. Yeah, I think it is good. It's good to self-analysis. I think is useful to a point. Sometimes to a huge point, to a great degree.
Yeah. Desiree, what is your editing process like with your songs when you're because you're working with other people? Are you taking your songs back and then going through the wordplay? Because a lot of your rhymes are very tight and kind of sort of very nicely constructed, and those rhymes and those lines and those readings seem natural, but often they're the result of a lot of futzing about and tweaking and stuff. So what is your editing process like?
Yeah, it depends on who I'm writing with. I'll always ask that in a co-write, just out of respect for the co-writer. Like, are they okay doing edits after? Do they want to make sure we get it down? Like, is this final form? Yeah, I'll always ask. And then sometimes, more often, like almost always, whoever I'm co-writing with will say, yeah, absolutely. Like, let's serve the song and make the song as best as we can. And if we need to edit it after, then let's do that. And I personally try and do that too, to keep an open mind about, what is in the best interest of that song. Right. And then sometimes, if I'm writing for radio, like if I'm looking for a commercial release, that's very different than writing, something super personal. And, you really have to serve the song in a commercial, in a commercial write if you're writing for radio. And, often commercial songs are the songs that I feel the least connected to, admittedly.
How do you approach those two things? Like, between your personal songs and sort of writing for radio specifically? Because I think a lot of people they kind of write, and whereas if you're consciously writing for radio, how do you approach that differently than what you would do normally?
I try and disconnect myself from what I think will do well commercially, because I'm also a business person, right? And so I want to make a living at what I'm doing for as long as I possibly can. And, and it's tough sometimes, because sometimes you don't really feel particularly connected to that song. But I just try and do my best to disconnect my own personal feelings from it in the sense of like, maybe I don't really like that melody, or maybe I'm not really attached to it, but I know that it'll resonate with a particular audience or whatever the case might be. Yeah. So that's kind of my process. But then sometimes, like Love You to Death, for instance, that is not a commercial country radio song. And I actually made the decision to release it as the lead single off my most recent album, because I believed in the message so much of, imposing boundaries on somebody struggling with an addiction. And I think, especially coming out of COVID, like that was something that, at least in the circles I've been in, that, people are talking a lot about in terms of, having sat at home for 2.5 years and, drinking wine, and all of a sudden people are it affected people differently. And so I thought flowing from that this was a topic that might be safe at country radio, mainstream country radio. And surprisingly, that song is one of the highest streamed songs off my album. And so sometimes I'll break my own rules, and just, if I really, really believe in a song, I'll go ahead and release it. And I mean, it's always a risk, but that one in particular paid off.
Are you
maybe
approaching?
Sorry, Phil. Oh, well, I was just going to say, maybe that's instructive though for you, because maybe the reason it's connecting with people is because it's connecting with you, and it's a real thing for you, rather than an exercise or expressing something that's more commonplace. Maybe, I'm just saying, I'm throwing that out as devil's advocate.
Yeah.
Are you approaching the melodies differently? Like when you're going for radio, is there a different sort of approach to the melodies, or?
Yeah. Like country radio, I always feel the melodies, like it needs to be faster. It needs to be more upbeat. Typically is what I'm hearing on country radio. So yeah, like that's how I know. That when we knew we wanted a single, I knew that I wanted it to be a country release, or one, the first or second single release off of the album. And so when Tyler and I sat down to write it, I knew that I wanted it to be upbeat. Like I was looking specifically to write an upbeat song. And so, in the course of talking that out in the co-write, that was how we arrived at okay, well, let's move forward with this idea. And that's how I know was the end result of that.
So how did you edit the process so that it would work on radio? I just, because I find that approach really fascinating, that, to sort of produce a product, which is what you're doing, which of course, as anyone who produces, you're producing a product, but how, like, are you constructing the words in a certain way, or the song structure in a certain way?
Okay, this is going to be embarrassing to admit this, but if you listen to mainstream country radio, okay, let me back up. When I first fell in love with country music, I was 5-6 years old, and I grew up listening to Kitty Wells and Charlie Pride and Waylon Jennings and Loretta Lynn and Dolly Parton, and some of the people that I looked up to that were rebels back then, and they wrote about real topics. When you think about Coat of Many Colors, or Loretta Lynn releasing The Pill, like those were real topics of substance, and like there was meat in those songs. And I feel like lyrically, much of that has been lost in country radio today. I think we're seeing some of it come back with the likes of Lainey Wilson, Hardy, Morgan Wallen. But I don't feel like we're hearing that here in Canada as much. And so when I'm writing specifically for radio, I know to keep it fluffy, keep it sweet,
right,
upbeat. And I haven't mastered it. I mean, I haven't had a top 10 hit in Canada. I'm not saying that I know the answers to that, but like that's what I'm hearing, and so that's generally what I'm trying to write for to get airplay, which is embarrassing to admit, but it's the truth.
I think it's what a lot of people go through, and I think it's honest of you to say so. And I appreciate the candor, actually, myself. I think good for you. That's I think, as you say,
good for you for selling out.
No, not at all. I don't see it as a sellout at all. As you say, you're a business person, and you want to maintain your business, and you want to the getting played on the radio means you can talk to you're speaking to an audience. You're addressing an audience, and then that audience will come and see you perform. And then, then you'll speak to them then as well. Like it's a means to an end as far as I'm concerned. I think it's really good.
Yeah. Thank you.
That said, it is interesting, the differences between American country and Canadian country. And it seems to me, not being an expert at all, but it seems to me that it's always been like that. There's always been a divide. And the Canadian side has always been less in an interesting sort of way, less gimmicky sort of, but at the same time, more conservative.
Yeah.
Is that fair to say?
I think so. I think that's very fair to say. Yeah. Yeah.
I was.
It doesn't seem to be as much reliant on the song factory aspect of Nashville. Like, there are more writers across Canada who, work together regularly and get on the radio and stuff, but they're not all concentrated in this one area working to pump out songs all day and all night.
Yeah. And it's funny because, you go to Nashville and a lot of the people that you're writing with are Canadian.
I know. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's weird.
But when you talk about having a means to an end, I mean, I'm not always a sellout. I will say that, as an Indigenous artist, there are things that I write about in the country genre that don't fit in the mainstream genre because of my identity, and so often, if I'm on tour and if I'm traveling in one of the more conservative provinces in the country, I'm sometimes nervous, to be honest, about sharing who I am and sharing, for instance, I've got a song called Break the Chain, and that song is about, I co-wrote that with Chris Gaffney, and that song is about, I always introduce it as talking about my grandmother as a residential school survivor, my dad being a day school survivor, and then me being the first generation on the paternal side of my family to not have not have had to attend a church government-run school. Wow. And a lot of times, when people think about the residential school era or even the day school era, they think that was hundreds of years ago. And then I'm sitting there right in front of them and I'm telling them I'm the first generation. I'm not even 40 years old. Yeah. And then I sing this song and I talk about being a mother, and I talk about, I have two daughters, Grace and Natalie, who are 12 and 9 years old. And I talk about, how if you're a parent, you just want your kids to have a better life than the one you had, or the one that your dad or mom had, or the one that your grandparents had. I mean, that's what we all work for is the evolution of our generations. And then I sing this song called Break the Chain about my daughters breaking the chain of intergenerational trauma. And I've taken that risk in the more conservative provinces on tour. And I've had some really silly, interesting discussions after shows with folks who are not very educated and are fairly ignorant. But what I've managed to do by allowing myself to be vulnerable and allowing myself to be personal is I've managed to put a human face to some of the questions that they might have about what it means to be Indigenous and what kind of a relationship we want with Indigenous people in Canada. And, sometimes, when long story short, long way of saying, when you talk about having a means to an end, releasing those fluffy songs allows me to get in front of these conservative audiences to talk and sing about the stuff that I really want to talk and sing about. And maybe change some minds and change some hearts along the way.
Yeah, I think that's what I was getting at is I don't see it as a sellout. I know why you would say that, and I get it, but I don't see it as a sellout because I think that thing you just described is more important than worrying about, like, as long as you still like the songs, the fluffy ones, as long as you still like them, even if you don't feel as close to them, doesn't mean you're disowning them. That's not, that's not the same thing. So I think it's honest, and every songwriter, as you know, has songs of theirs that they don't like as much, and yet there are people in your audience who are like, "Oh, would you play that one?" And you think, "Oh, do I have to?" Everybody does that, and there are many songwriters who have huge hit records who are then saddled with that for the rest of their lives, and they don't like it at all. But I think any success you have is really good, and anyway, I don't think it's selling out. That's all. That's the final word.
Yeah, well,
final word.
But also, when you are wanting to be a songwriter or a musician or an artist of some sort, you are a producer, not a producer in terms of a music producer, but you produce things that people are going to exchange for money, and it's like someone who makes lasagna and sells it. You have to make lasagna People say, I like those lasagna, here's $2. So you are making something that people want to consume and trade for money. If you want to make this more than just a loving hobby, and there's nothing wrong with that. And maybe your clientele is very small and very niche, and with the internet you can do that to a certain extent. But I don't think there's anything wrong with actually thinking, okay, I'm going to produce something that people are going to want to consume, because otherwise you're just crazy person yelling on the corner, which is as much,
that's right.
which isn't as resounding as much you can. What's you've done a lot of co-writes. Do you have any sort of suggestions for people wanting to get into doing co-writes? Maybe stuff they should watch out for, or things they should maybe talk about before they start?
Oh gosh, I have
how do you
so
find a
many
co-writer?
things.
Yeah.
Okay. So I've been really, really lucky to work with some incredible producers. Like the first fellow that I worked with was the late Craig Fotheringham in Winnipeg, Manitoba. He produced my very first album when I was 14 years old. And I grew up in Dauphin, which is 4 hours north of Winnipeg. And my mom was a single mom. She didn't have the means to drive me to the city every weekend. And so I would actually hop the Greyhound bus at 12, 13 years old. Craig would pick me up at the bus depot and we'd go to work in the studio. And that guy, he probably should have taken writing credits on that first album, because he did help make some edits to the stuff, but he probably knew that the album wouldn't be very, very successful anyways commercially, and he didn't care too much. But he was so kind and gracious to me. And the way that he treated me taught me a lot about how to treat other people as I navigated my way as a young person, coming up in this industry. And then, the second producer that I worked with, Aaron Chattervady, he was I loved working with him. He was such a good songwriter. And he was my very first co-write, actually. And so he connected me with other writers through the production process. And then Chris Bergaffney, who's done the last 3 albums, we've co-written, I don't know how many songs together. But in the course of experiencing those co-writes with people who were safe people for me, I learned that to be open-minded, to not be overly pushy, don't marry yourself to every single idea that you have. Be open to change throughout the process of a collab. And then in the course of co-writing with just the producers that I'd worked with and the folks that they connected me with, I built the confidence enough in myself as a writer to then approach other writers that were on my radar. So, Crystal Shawanda is Canada's most successful Indigenous country artist, probably of all time. And she was somebody that I looked up to as a teenager. And, she was the only brown face on TV, really, on CMT. And I just thought wow, here's this woman singing duets with Reba McEntire and just doing incredible things. And I'd wanted to write with her for years, but I didn't have the confidence in myself or my ability. And I finally reached out to her, and I started doing that, with Dave Wasloo. Doc Walker's a band I've looked up to for a long time as well. And I just started throwing caution to the wind and giving myself permission to take a risk and asking people. But in the course of doing that, knowing your lane, I knew when I sat down with Crystal Shawanda that I was the junior artist in that room. And so I'm not going to her to bilk her ideas. I'm coming to her with ideas of my own, and hooks and titles and maybe some rhymes or some lyrics. I'm not going to her to say, "Hey, Crystal, what have you got? What do you got up your sleeve today?" And, I'm coming in prepared, and I'm going into work and to share what I've got in my brain. And I did the same thing with Dave. And I find when you're working with more senior writers that they have a bit more respect for you if you go in prepared and if you go in with a bit of humility.
And that's one of those principles of Nashville co-writing, is writing up. Writing with somebody who's got more going on than you do, who maybe has a publishing deal, a record deal, who's a star, or whatever. But you try and do that so that they can sort of pull you up. But you got to do your thing, and as you say, come prepared, and show up with some ideas, and hopefully they'll like those ideas.
Yeah, exactly. I remember.
I think also probably with the understanding that if they don't happen to like your one idea, that doesn't mean you never get to use that idea again. You just don't use that idea with them.
Oh, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. I heard a great story that I'll tell very quickly about Mark Hudson, who was writing, had an appointment to write with Aerosmith. And he'd had some hit records, but never at the level of, this is the newly reconstituted Aerosmith from like 20 years ago, who were really hot. So Steve Tyler and Joe Perry said, "What have you got?" And so he had prepared some ideas for Aerosmith, and he had things that sounded kind of like Steve Tyler. He had, one that went with a big guitar and so forth. And Steve Tyler was like, "No, what else have you got?" So he goes through two more ideas, and they don't like them, and they're all like, and then he said, they say, "What else have you got?" And he had nothing else prepared. So he played them the song he had just finished writing himself that he happened to love. And it was a song. This is, further to what you were saying earlier about, a song you feel close to. He wasn't prepared to share that because he didn't think they'd like it because it was personal. And he started singing, "There's something wrong in the world today. I don't know what it is. Something that ain't right." And it's living on the edge, and Steve Tyler at the end of the song goes, "That, I'll take that." Okay. And Mark Hudson thought, well, I've already written that. But he decided that he would rather cut in Aerosmith, and make it a three-way song instead of, just keeping it to himself and not having a hit with it. And of course, he had a huge hit, and he was not resentful at all, even though he told the story for years afterwards.
Desiree, when you mentioned that you approach these songwriters, like how do you do that?
How do you find them? How do you get in touch?
Okay, so my very first writing trip to Nashville, Chris Bergaffney was producing my record, and he was gracious enough to connect me with a bunch of his contacts and set me up with some rights. And so we were talking before the show today about, not researching people. I made the mistake in that very first trip to research who I was writing with. Cool. And the very first day I was on Music Row, and I knew that I was going in to write with a guy who had a hit with Tim McGraw and some of the biggest names in country music. And I was scared shitless. And it affected my creative process. And I didn't find that was I didn't come with my best self because I was too nervous and anxious. And so that experience taught me, do not research anybody because their achievements are going to scare the hell out of you. And at least for me, I mean, maybe other people can put on a braver face than I could, but it messed with me. But Crystal and I are Facebook friends, and I've opened for her I had opened for her a couple of times and shared a stage with her a couple of times. And I always just kind of wanted to respect her space though, and not, not step on her toes or I didn't want her to feel like I was trying to ride her coattails, because she is somebody that I really respect and admire. And then I thought, you know what, I could just tell her that. I could just tell her that, I'd love to write with her. And so, I had reached out to her. I was heading down to New Orleans for Folk Alliance International. And then after that, I was renting a car and driving north to Nashville. And, I said, listen, I'm going to be in Nashville in January. I'd love to sit down and do a write with you. I know that, we've shared a stage a few times, and please don't feel like you owe me anything. I just really admire you and I love what you do. And it would be amazing if we could write a song together. And within 10 minutes, she messaged me back and she's like, absolutely. Are you crazy? She goes, yes, come over to my house in Nashville. And so I showed up at her house, and, I met her hubby and her baby girl, and we went up to her studio, and 3 hours later we had a song called Sometimes I Drink, which to date is probably my most commercially successful song, written by two Indigenous women
Wow.
It sat on the country music charts for 16 weeks in Canada.
Whoa.
And went top 10 on iTunes across all genres in its first week of release. It was a really big song for me, and I'm super, super thankful for Crystal for sitting down with me to do that one. And then, Dave Wasloo was a different approach because he's from Manitoba, and we were at the after party one night for the Manitoba Country Music Awards, and we were standing in a circle, and I looked over, and there's Dave standing right next to me, and he was drinking beer, and I had made maybe one or two trips too many to the hospitality bar. And I had a little bit of liquid courage, and I just said, "Hey, Dave," I said, "You know what? I'd love to write with you sometime." And he is like the most humble person ever. And he just said, "Absolutely, let's do it." And then we tried to connect our schedules. They didn't align for probably a year and a half or something. And then during the pandemic in August of 21, we finally made time and we booked a date to get Wouldn't That Be Fun done. And we wrote that song. Initially, it was supposed to be a song just for me. But then when we wrote it, as we went through our editing process, and we rewrote it a couple of times, actually, that song was originally called And Then Some. And then it turned out to Wouldn't That Be Fun? And it came about where we realized, like, this is a duet. This isn't just a Desiree song. And so then I'm thinking, oh God, I really want Dave to sing this with me, but how the hell am I going to ask him to do that? And so at the end of the co-write, I just blurted it out and I just said, "Hey, Dave," I said, "I think your voice would be really amazing on this track. Would you be willing to do that?" And he goes, "Of course. Yeah, let's do it." And so, and that song turned out to be one of my highest streaming singles too. It was pretty cool.
Wow.
I'm curious, when you're co-writing with these folks, you're sitting with a guitar, they have a guitar, you're sitting just singing stuff, like nose to nose kind of?
Yeah, we did. Both of those writes were face-to-face. I had a guitar in the write with Dave, but Dave is like a great player. So he was the lead guitar person in that write. And then Crystal, when I was traveling, I didn't have a guitar at all. And so she was the lone person holding the guitar in that room. And yeah,
because a lot of writing these days for a lot of people, depending on the genre, of course, is with what I call laptop producers, where a producer with a laptop, will write a music track, and then they'll come to you and ask you to top line on it, and what I mean by that, listener, is sing the lyric and like make up the lyric and melody. Which to me is the song, by the way. The lyric and the melody is the song. The backing track isn't, because I can't sing a drum beat that you know what I mean? Like boom, ba, boom, boom, ba. That could be a million songs. But if I sing Yesterday, you instantly know what song that is. So for me, it always strikes me that the top liner gets short shrift in that equation. But it doesn't matter. I'm not going to change the world. That's the way a lot of songwriting is going. And I'm wondering if you've done any of that.
No.
Writing to laptop stuff. You haven't yet.
No.
Yeah.
No. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if I'd be able to, in all honesty. Like, I feel like, and maybe it's a country thing, I don't know, but I just feel like, especially if I'm not writing for radio, like if I'm really trying not to be fluffy, and I'm currently writing, this is the headspace that I'm in and where I'm coming from right now today, is that I'm currently writing for a folk roots Americana project. And which is like really raw and stripped down and vulnerable and emotional. And I just feel like you have to put lyrics first in that kind of a project.
Yeah, I tend to agree. Yeah, it's I have certainly sung to track. I mean, I've certainly sung to tracks that I've made myself where I didn't have an idea. Like I have done a lot of writing for television and theme songs for animation and stuff like that. So I might not have written the words yet, and like I might be just dry of ideas. So I think I got to do something. This is due on Tuesday. So I come up with some chords and I come up with a track that sounds suitable. And then I think, okay, well, now I got to sing something over top of this. And so I've sung to it and it's worked. And I've actually really enjoyed it, having never really done it before. Yeah, but it's a weird way of writing because I start with words too, and then I find the way the words sing, and then that turns into a song. But in the other way I'm describing, it's a whole other mind bending experience.
Yeah, I bet.
Well, that's how I
do
write
enjoy
too.
it.
I mean, lyrics are the last thing I write. In fact,
Right,
often,
interesting.
Yeah.
Oh
in
my
fact,
goodness.
The whole song is done, and I've got the melody, and very often the melody is completely done, but it's the lyrics because
That's so interesting.
that's not my strength. My strength is I worked with a drummer, and he wrote this heartbreaking song. And I said, "How did you write this?" He said, "Oh, I just sat down over lunch." He was like a business guy. He sat down over his lunch hour and he wrote this out. It's about heartbreaking and being like sort of ignored by your partner. It has this beautiful line saying, "You see me falling and you check the time," which I just think is just an emotional,
That's a great line.
Yeah. And he met his wife in high school. He's never gone out with another woman. They had a fantastic relationship. They've had a perfect loving relationship with like 2 kids. And I'm just going like, where the heck are you getting this stuff from? But he can just he sits down and he just cranks it up. But I can't do that. So I guess it's all about having different strengths, and yeah.
Back when I was married, I found myself writing a number of songs about marriages breaking up, which I thought was really weird at the time. And then, of course, it happened, right? But I came up with ideas that I still carry around today thinking that could be a good song. And that's, I broke up with the mother of my child 15 years ago. But I still carry around these ideas that I think are good ideas in and of themselves, even though, at the time they were fiction. Desiree, do you ever do that? First of all, do you hang on to ideas for a long time, or is there a stale date and you just think, yeah, no, I don't want to work on that?
No, I don't. I don't use, I use pen and paper. I still use pen and paper. For me, there's something really important about feeling the words on a page. Yeah. And I don't erase anything, and I journal a lot. And so sometimes if I'm in a rut, I'll even go back to my journals and look at, what was I right, or what was I talking about? Where was I emotionally during that time, to try and instill ideas in myself to go forward. Like if I've got an important co-write coming up where I want to go prepared with some ideas, I'll go back to those journals and look through, okay, what were you feeling, at that moment in time, or, in that space that you were in. And I don't delete anything. Like it nothing gets erased or crossed out. And I find that when I've written with folks on a laptop, backspace is used all the time, and you're just erasing gold because, you don't know what can come from those ideas that culminated in that session.
Yeah, no, it's really true. I wrote with Alanis Morissette, and she recorded everything on her work tapes, and she'd never go back. She never erased, even on this is back in cassette days. She would never go back. She just kept it all, and she kept it all. She almost had the machine running from the time she walked in the door. And, just so in case anything happened, she'd have it there. And, 9 times out of 10, something doesn't happen. But that one time, she was prepared. She had it. And I think you're right about writing on a computer. Although I do it, I also do pen and paper. I think writing with pen and paper is way better, because even if you stroke a line through a line, you still have it there. You can still see it, and you can go back if you need to. I think it's good. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I think the journaling process is a great habit for any songwriter to get into. It's one I've never actually managed to get into myself, but it certainly seems to work. And I know they always said Sting had a huge book of phrases and words that he'd carry around. And when they were working on stuff, he would just sort of open it up and, find the stuff that kind of worked. Yeah, it's all about the process, and it's so fascinating seeing everyone's different version. And it was fun watching Get Back and seeing them, Paul McCartney's process of writing Get Back, which is so it's fascinating stuff. Desiree, what's coming up next for you?
I am heading to the National Music Center to mentor for, I think it's the Coutinho. I'm not getting the pronunciation right, and I'm embarrassed to say that, but it's an artist development program that I'm mentoring at in a couple of weeks. And then I head to the Canadian Country Music Week, and then I come home for a few days to spend 3 nights with my girls. And then I hit the road for another 8 nights on tour at the end of September. And then the Manitoba Country Music Awards in November. And like I said, I'm currently writing for my next album.
Wow, that's great. What's the next album?
Hoping to release it in June next year.
That's
so
awesome.
Great to be that busy. I think that's fantastic.
Amazing. Yeah.
Thank you.
I think that's every songwriter's dream is to be that busy, but so often we just have to work all day.
Yeah.
Well, I hear the band. I think that means they want to go home. So that means that's all the time we have here on Song Talk Radio. Desiree, how can people get more of you?
I'm on Facebook at Desiree Dorion, TikTok at the Desiree Dorion, Instagram at Desiree Dorion, and of course my website, DesireeDorion.com.
Could you spell spell the whole name if you could?
DesireeDorion.
Fantastic. And don't forget, we want to hear from you on any subject, so send us an email at feedback@songtalk.ca. You can find the links to all the products, books, and whatnot we talk about here on the show on the resources page. And no matter if you happen to be in the Toronto, Ontario area or anywhere else around the world, why not join us for the next Song Talk Radio's Songwriters Meetup? A bit of a mouthful. It happens online via Zoom and locally in Toronto and soon St. John's, Newfoundland. It's where you can network with other songwriters and get insightful feedback on your works in progress. It's free to join and free to attend. A blast each and every time. Stop by the website at songtalk.ca for the link and for the info. Desiree, what's your favorite social media channel?
Instagram.
Instagram. And Blair, how can people get more of you?
Pretty much the same way you would get in touch with Desiree, except you change the name to Blair Packham. But, kind of the same thing, blairpackham.com. BlairPackham. And I'm on Instagram, I'm on Facebook, and I'm pretty easy to find. But check out Song Studio, songstudio.ca. That's my workshop, and I'm very proud of the work we do.
Absolutely. You can get more of Neil at neilmodi.com and more of me at philemery.ca. And stop by the website at songtalk.ca to browse past shows and find out how you could be a guest on the show. Thanks for listening, everyone, and keep on writing.
Writing.
Maybe I'll fix that in post. It's okay.